Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's taking a look at a model of 1867 cadet model of Trapdoor Springfield. And if you look this up in most of the books out there, you will get some very basic descriptions of how this is a slightly smaller model of a Trapdoor Springfield. And they didn't make many. But I thought it's important to put this in a little more context, because it really is kind of a more unusual and more interesting rifle than the physical dimensions make it out to be. So when we say cadet model, it's specifically cadets at West Point, the United States Military Academy. That academy opened in 1802, and they had some issues for the first couple of decades with really big rifles. Like, it was a flintlock musket was the standard US military infantry arm when West Point opened, and some really small cadets who had trouble with these things. So to put things in context, first of all, at this point in time, you could enroll in West Point as young as 14. We also had people who weren't quite as big, and actually because of industrialization, people were growing a little bit more slowly at this point than they would do later once we get to, say, the 20th century. So you had cadets who were potentially 14 years old who, by the time they were, well, the average height of a 16-year-old cadet in 1856 was 5'5". By the time they hit 21, they'd be 5'8". But imagine that you're giving a 5-foot-long plus musket to a 14-year-old who's probably barely over 5 feet tall himself. It's going to cause some problems. So from 1802 until 1830, they kind of tried to address this by making shortened versions of existing guns, and there were a bunch of workarounds. And it was in 1830 that they first decided to have Springfield Armory make a specific cadet model of US service rifles that could be given to West Point cadets for training and drill practice, and have something that was a little more suitable to their relatively small size at the time. So from 1830 on, they start making cadet models of the various guns. When we get to 1867, well, I think it was developed in 1866, we get this guy, which is a cadet version of the Trapdoor Springfield. And yet this is still a bit unusual because all of the previous cadet rifles had been just shortened versions of the same standard gun. This is almost entirely unique parts. Like, the breech block is unique, the hammer's unique, the side plate's unique, the barrel's unique, the stock's unique. It's all different, which is kind of weird. So let's take a look. Let me show you specifically what those differences are. To start with the markings, we'll take a look at the side plate of the gun. It's marked US Springfield with a big eagle crest. That's pretty normal. Dated 1867. The cadet pattern here is the only trapdoor you will find with an 1867 date on it, on the lock plate there. And we then have an 1866 date and a little eagle's head crest on the breech block itself. And another one of those eagle stamps on the back of the receiver. These trapdoor rifles were not serialized. They would start that with the next pattern of trapdoor cadet rifles, which we'll talk about in a moment. But some of them do have rack numbers like this one here under the rear sight. The finish on this is relatively worn, but originally there would have been a case-hardened lock plate and hammer, a blackened breech block, which you can still sort of see, and then the rest of the parts in the white, which you can actually still see. Worth pointing out, there are no sling swivels on these rifles. These were made for training and drill and not for actually carrying over long distances. So a standard infantry trapdoor will have a sling swivel here. In fact, here's an example of an infantry one. You've got that sling swivel. And then you have both a sling swivel and a stacking swivel on the front barrel band. And those do not exist on the cadet model. And the barrel is a bit shorter. So here's our cadet. This is a 29 3/4 inch barrel, where the standard infantry pattern was 33 inches. They did keep the exact same rear sight as the standard infantry trapdoor though. And mechanically, this does work exactly like a standard Trapdoor Springfield. So you would bring the hammer back to half cock, lift up the breech block, load a cartridge in there, close it, cock the hammer the rest of the way, and then you can fire. Worth pointing out, these are of course 50 caliber guns because the original infantry trapdoors, the Allin conversions, were 50-70. This is chambered for a 50-55 cartridge. That means the same bullet diameter, 50 caliber for the bullet, but a powder charge of just 55 grains instead of a full 70 grains of black powder. It's a smaller, lighter rifle, and it's being given to guys of significantly smaller stature. So having a reduced power cartridge like the carbine cartridge does definitely make sense. Now, you can see right here, if you guys know trapdoors, you've already noticed this. This is a unique element to the Cadet model, these lightning cuts in the breech block. If I bring back, this is an 1884 pattern infantry one, but this is a normal trapdoor breech block. You can see it's solid right there. The Cadet models had these two cutouts on the breech. They lighten it up. Like why they chose to do that, I have no idea. Maybe just to lighten the cartridge, and they decided that it didn't want to do that on the regular guns, but you'll only find that on these Cadets. The side plate is also thinner than a normal trapdoor rifle. A standard is a 0.3 inch thick side plate. These are a little bit less, at 0.19 inch. And that means, well, there's some rippling effects from that. It means the hammer is not quite the same because it has to have less offset to get to the same position to hit the firing pin here. So the rear sight's the same, but the breech block is different, the hammer's different, the side plate is different, the trigger guard is different because of course it doesn't have the attachments for the sling swivel. Like so many of the little parts on this are not the same as a regular trapdoor. Cadet rifles were not made in particularly large numbers, certainly not relative to the number of standard infantry rifles being made. But the 1867 Trapdoor Cadet is a particularly low production gun. They only made 424 of these. And by 1869, they replaced them with a gun that actually was a standard trapdoor rifle, just shortened a little bit for cadets. And they made several thousand of those, many more than this weirdo oddball pattern. There would then be several more trapdoor, well, two more additional Trapdoor Springfield cadet models. They did one in 1873, because 1873 is when the US Army decided to replace the 50 caliber trapdoor with something more modern, and in their infinite wisdom, they chose a 45 caliber trapdoor to be the more modern thing. So they made a new cadet rifle as well in 45 caliber, that was the 1873, and then they updated it in 1884 to reflect changes in sights and a general upgrading of the infantry trapdoors to the 1884 pattern, so they had an 1884 cadet model as well. And that would actually be the last of the cadet rifles that were made by Springfield for West Point, because after that, a couple of things happened. First off, we adopted the Krag-Jorgenson, which is a lighter, significantly shorter rifle, and we didn't need a non-standard rifle for the cadets anymore because the standard thing was small enough by that point. In addition, the age standards for West Point had changed, and by that point you had to be 17 to enroll. It's also, we're getting past some of the early industrialization impacts. Agriculture is improving, nutrition's improving, people are getting bigger, faster, and so this was no longer the size issue that it had been in the 1810s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So, like I said, I think the 1867 Trapdoor is a much more interesting gun and has a lot more stuff going on with it than you'll normally get by looking at just some statistical readouts of how long the barrel is. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this as well, learned something today about a neat and different rifle. Thanks to Morphy's for giving me access to this. These are really very scarce rifles because they were such a short and small production run. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.